The crystal water glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the dining room floor, and for a second, I thought maybe that's what would finally make my son look at me. It didn't. He kept laughing at something the girl beside him had whispered, and my daughter-in-law just glanced at the mess like it was something the cleaning lady would deal with later. I'm 71 years old. My name doesn't matter much in this story because I stopped feeling like a person with a name about 3 years into living under my own roof as a guest. What matters is the bowl. The bowl is what I came to tell you about. Let me start somewhere that makes sense. I worked 38 years at a steel fabrication plant outside Toledo, Ohio. Foreman for the last 14 of those years. My wife, the only woman I ever loved, passed in the spring of 2019 after a stroke we never saw coming. She went to bed on a Tuesday complaining of a headache, and I woke up Wednesday morning a widower. 43 years of marriage gone in the space of one bad night. I held her hand in the hospital while the machines made that sound machines make when there's nothing left to do, and I told her I'd be all right. I lied to her. It was the first lie I'd ever told her in my life, and I told it because I didn't want her last thought to be worry. After she died, our boy moved back home. He was 34 then, working some kind of marketing job in Columbus, between apartments, between girlfriends, between everything. He showed up at the funeral with hollow eyes and stayed an extra week, then said he'd been thinking about being closer to family, helping me out. The house being too big for one man. I believed him because I needed to believe him. A father always wants to believe his son. He brought a girl with him about 8 months later. Said her name was Brielle, said she was an interior designer, said she wouldn't be there long. That was almost 4 years ago now. They never married. She just stayed. She brought her things one suitcase at a time, until one day I realized her clothes filled the closet in the guest room, and her shoes lined up under the bed, and her perfume bottles crowded the bathroom counter where my wife's used to sit. I didn't say anything. I didn't know how to say anything. The house I'm talking about, I built it. Or, I should say, I paid every penny for it, and I did the framing myself with my brother in the summer of 1981. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a finished basement, a patio out back where my wife used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings. I paid the mortgage off in 2007. The deed has my name on it and only my name. I want you to remember that. It becomes important. For the first year my son lived with me, things were almost good. He'd come home from work and we'd watch the Browns lose on Sunday afternoons, eat sandwiches, talk a little about his mother. He was grieving too in his own way, and I gave him room. I'd give my son the moon if he asked for it. Any father would. Then Brielle moved in, and things changed in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on at first. She rearranged the living room without asking. She threw out the lamp my wife and I bought on our honeymoon in Niagara Falls, because she said it didn't match the color scheme. When I asked where it went, she said, "Oh, was that yours?" I thought it was just old. She smiled when she said it, like she was being patient with me. My son started calling me Pop in front of her. He'd never called me that in his life. He called me Dad until he was 17, then Father when he wanted to be sarcastic, but never Pop. Pop is what you call an old man you're tolerating. The first time he said it, at dinner, he asked me to pass the salt and called me Pop, and Brielle giggled into her wine glass, and I felt something cold go through my chest. I passed the salt anyway. Around year 2, the credit card thing started. He came to me one evening in the kitchen, real serious, said his credit had taken a hit during the move, said he just needed to be added as an authorized user on one of my cards to rebuild. Just temporary. 6 months, maybe a year, I added him. I didn't think twice. He was my boy. He was the boy I'd taught to ride a bike on Maplewood Avenue. The boy I'd carried on my shoulders to see fireworks every 4th of July. You don't say no to that boy. A few months later, he asked if Brielle could be added too, just so they could manage household stuff together. I said yes. I'm telling you this because I want to be honest about my part in it. I let it happen. I watched it happen. I told myself 100 different stories about why it was fine. He was finding his footing. She was helping him. They'd pay me back. They'd grow up. By year 3, I was eating Campbell's soup most nights. Not because I couldn't afford anything else. Because I'd come home from the senior center where I do woodworking on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and there'd be no food in the house. Brielle had taken to grocery shopping for what she called their meal plan, which involved a lot of organic this and free range, that, and somehow there was never anything for me. She'd bought me a separate small section of the pantry and labeled it with my initials and a little chalkboard sign, like I was a roommate. Inside it, cans of Campbell's, some saltines, instant coffee. She thought she was being thoughtful. She told her friends about it on the phone. I gave him his own little area. Isn't that sweet? I'd sit in my recliner at night and look at the wedding photo of me and my wife above the mantel. And I'd ask her, in my head, what to do. She didn't answer because the dead don't answer. But I knew what she'd say. She'd say, "Honey, your boy needs you." She'd always said that, even when he didn't. The credit card statements were coming to my phone now because Brielle had set that up too. Said she'd help me go paperless. She was very helpful that way. I'd see the charges. Restaurants in Columbus. A weekend in Nashville. A spa called something French. Sephora. Nordstrom. Best Buy. The numbers got bigger. By the spring of last year, they were running close to $4,000 a month between them. My pension is decent and I have my savings. But I'm not a wealthy man. I started shifting money from savings to checking just to keep up with the minimums. I told myself I'd talk to him soon. I just needed the right moment. The right moment never came. The moment that came was my 70th birthday. I had actually forgotten it was coming up. That sounds strange, but when you live alone with 2 people who barely look at you, you stop marking the calendar. It was a Saturday in late October. I'd gone out to the garage early to work on a rocking chair I was building for a great niece I have in Cincinnati. When I came back inside around 11, the dining room had been decorated. Streamers. A banner that said 70 in gold letters. Flowers on the table. I stood in the doorway in my work shirt with sawdust on my pants, and Brielle came around the corner with a smile so wide it didn't look real. "Happy birthday," she said. "We're throwing you a party tonight. It's going to be wonderful." My son came in behind her, smiling that same smile, and clapped me on the shoulder. Big 7-0 pop, couldn't let it pass without a celebration. I should have known then. I should have felt it, but I'm telling you, when your son tells you he wants to celebrate you, you let yourself believe him. I went and showered. I put on the gray suit my wife had picked out for me 10 years ago, the one she said made me look distinguished. I stood in front of the mirror and tried to find my own face under all the years. Guests started arriving at 6. 20 of them I counted later. A few were people I knew, neighbors from down the street, a couple from church I hadn't seen in months, my younger brother and his wife who'd driven up from Cleveland. The rest were strangers to me. Friends of my son and Brielle, young people in expensive clothes, laughing too loud, drinking the wine I hadn't bought. They filled my living room and called me Mister, and shook my hand and didn't really look at me when they did. The dining room table was set beautifully. China I recognized as my wife's, the set we'd gotten for our 25th anniversary that Brielle had taken out of the cabinet and started using for her own dinner parties. Crystal glasses. Cloth napkins folded into little fans. A roast in the center of the table that smelled like heaven. Side dishes everywhere. Brielle had cooked, or had it catered, I couldn't tell which. When everyone was seated, Brielle stood up and tapped her glass with a fork and gave a little speech. She said tonight was a special night, a chance to honor the man who'd given us so much. She actually used those words. My son sat next to her, smirking. My brother caught my eye from across the table and gave me a small, confused smile. Then she said, "We've prepared something special for our birthday boy." And my son got up and went into the kitchen. He came back out carrying 2 bowls. The first one he set in front of Brielle. It had a little pile of beef tenderloin on it, mashed potatoes, asparagus tied with a string, a nice plate. The second bowl he carried over to where I sat at the head of the table, and he set it down in front of me with both hands like he was presenting something. I looked down. It was dog food. Brown, wet, chunky dog food. The kind you scoop out of a can. He'd put it in one of my wife's good china bowls. There was a little sprig of parsley on top, like a garnish. Like a joke. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just looked at it. My son was still standing next to my chair. He leaned down, close to my ear, but loud enough that everyone at the table could hear, and he said, "This is what freeloaders eat, old man. Hope you enjoy." The room went quiet. Not all at once. In waves. The people who heard him first stopped talking, and then the people next to them stopped, and then the whole table was silent, except for some music playing low on a speaker somewhere. Brielle was laughing into her napkin. A few of their friends were laughing too. That nervous laugh you do when you're not sure if something's a joke. My brother put down his fork and stared at my son like he didn't recognize him. I looked up at my boy, my only child. The boy I'd taught to throw a baseball. The boy I'd held in the hospital nursery 38 years ago and cried over because he was so small and so perfect. He was looking down at me with a smile on his face, like he'd just won something. I want to tell you I said something powerful. I want to tell you I stood up and gave a speech that shook him to his core. I didn't. I didn't say one word. I just stood up slowly, set my napkin on the table next to the bowl, and walked out of the dining room. I went up the stairs to my bedroom. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed I'd slept in for 40 years, and I cried for about 3 minutes. And then I stopped, and I started thinking. I sat there until I heard the party wind down around 11, until I heard the last car pull out of the driveway, until I heard my son and Brielle laughing in the kitchen as they cleaned up. I heard her say, "Did you see his face? Oh my God." I heard him laugh. I heard him laugh. I heard him laugh. That laugh did something to me I'm still trying to describe. It wasn't anger. Anger comes hot. This was cold. It was the coldest feeling I'd ever had in my life. It was the feeling of finally seeing somebody for who they actually are. After years of telling yourself a different story, I waited until I heard them go to bed. Around midnight, I came downstairs in my robe and slippers. The dining room was a mess of empty bottles and half-eaten food. The bowl was still on the table where I'd left it. I picked it up and walked it to the trash and dropped it in. Then I went to my office, the little room off the den where I keep my files, and I sat down at the desk, and I started writing things down on a yellow legal pad. Names, account numbers, phone numbers, the deed to the house, the 2 car titles, the brokerage account my wife and I had built over 40 years, the pension, the Social Security, the life insurance policy I'd taken out on myself when my boy was born. Everything. I stayed up until almost 4 in the morning. I had a list 6 pages long, and next to each item, I wrote what I was going to do with it. Sunday I slept in. They didn't notice. They never noticed me anymore. I came downstairs around noon and made myself eggs and toast in the kitchen, while Brielle was on the phone in the living room, talking to one of her friends about how tense the night before had gotten. My son was still in bed. I ate my breakfast at the kitchen counter, standing up. Brielle didn't say good morning. Monday, I got up at 6. I put on a clean shirt and slacks, and I drove out to my bank, the same branch I'd used since 1985. I sat in the lobby waiting for it to open, and when the manager unlocked the doors, I walked in and asked to see her in private. Her name was Mrs. Halpern, and she'd been at that branch for 20-some years. She'd helped me set up the trust after my wife died. I sat down across from her and I said, "I need to remove 2 authorized users from my credit cards effective immediately. I need to cancel the cards entirely and have new ones issued to me alone, and I need to put a freeze on all my accounts so that no transactions can occur without my in-person verification." She looked at me for a long second. Then she said, "Are you all right, sir?" I said, "I will be." We spent 2 hours in her office. By the time I walked out, my son and Brielle could not access a single one of my accounts. The credit cards were dead. The checking account had a fraud hold on it that required my fingerprint. The savings account had been moved to a new account number under a private banking service Mrs. Halpern recommended. All the automatic payments that had been running through my cards, the gym memberships and streaming services and the subscriptions I'd never agreed to, all dead. Then I drove to my attorney's office. I'd called him from the bank parking lot, and he'd cleared his afternoon for me. His name was Mr. Kavanaugh. He'd handled my will and my wife's estate and a property dispute I'd had back in '97. He was about my age, and he didn't ask many questions. He just listened. I told him I wanted to revise my will. I wanted to remove my son entirely. Every dollar, every asset, every piece of property. I told him I wanted to set up a trust that would benefit a few charities I cared about, my brother's grandchildren, and the senior center where I did woodworking. He asked me if I was sure. I said I'd never been more sure of anything. Then I told him about the house, the deed in my name. I asked him what my options were if there were 2 adult occupants who had no lease, no legal claim, and were not paying rent. He smiled a little. He said, "In Ohio, you can have them out in 30 days with proper notice. You can have them out in 3 days if there's any kind of threatening behavior." I told him about the dog food. He stopped smiling. He said, 3 days. We drew up the eviction notice that afternoon. Both names on it. We drew up a cease and desist regarding any future use of my financial information, my home address, or my vehicles. I had 2 cars, my truck, and a sedan that had been my wife's. My son had been driving the sedan for 2 years. Mr. Mine, Kavanaugh, helped me file the paperwork to remove him as an authorized driver and report the vehicle as no longer available to him. We did the same with the auto insurance. I drove home around 5. My son was on the couch watching television. Brielle was in the kitchen. I walked past them both without saying a word and went up to my bedroom. I locked the door. It was the first time I'd ever locked that door in my own house. I slept like a baby. Tuesday morning, I went to the post office and got a P.O. box. I went back to the house and gathered up every piece of mail that had my name on it, and I changed every address, every utility, every magazine, every doctor's office. From now on, nothing came to that house with my name attached. Tuesday afternoon, my son tried to use his credit card at a restaurant. It declined. He tried a different one. Declined. He came home that evening looking confused and a little angry, and he asked me from the bottom of the stairs if I'd had any problems with the bank. I was sitting in my chair in the den reading the newspaper. I didn't look up. I said, "No problems, just some adjustments." He stood there for a minute. Then he went into the kitchen. I heard Brielle whisper to him, "What's going on?" I heard him say, "I don't know." Wednesday morning at 9 sharp, the process server arrived. A young man in a polo shirt with a clipboard. He rang the doorbell. Brielle answered it in her bathrobe. I was at the kitchen table eating toast. I heard him ask for my son and Brielle by name. I heard her say, "What is this?" I heard him say, "You've been served." She came into the kitchen carrying the envelope, her face white. My son was right behind her. He'd just woken up. His hair was sticking up. He looked younger than he had in years, like a kid being told his teacher called. "What is this?" he said. He was holding the eviction notice. His hands were shaking a little. "What did you do?" I looked at him over the top of my newspaper. I said, "I gave you 30 days. That's more than you deserve." He started to laugh. That laugh from Saturday night. I want to tell you something. I'd never hit my son in his life. Not once. Not even a spank. But when he laughed at me right then, in my own kitchen, holding a legal eviction notice from his own father, I had to put my hands flat on the table to keep from getting up. He saw my face. He stopped laughing. "You're not serious," he said. "Pop. Come on, Pop." I said, "Don't call me Pop." Brielle started to cry. Real crying, ugly crying, the kind where your makeup runs. She said, "We don't have anywhere to go. Where are we supposed to go? You can't do this to your own son." I folded the newspaper. I set it down. I said, "My son served me dog food at my own birthday party in front of 20 people. My son has been spending my money for 3 years. My son hasn't said one kind word to me since his mother died. I don't have a son anymore. I have a tenant. And the tenant has 30 days." She looked at my son. He looked at the floor. Neither of them said anything. I went to my bedroom and finished getting dressed. I drove to the senior center and worked on the rocking chair until lunchtime. The next 2 weeks were strange in the house. They didn't talk to me. I didn't talk to them. They had no money, no credit, no cars except for Brielle's old Hyundai, which was barely running. They were eating ramen out of paper bowls. I ate at the senior center most days, or at the little diner downtown. I came home. I went to my room. I read my books. I slept in my locked bedroom. I got up and did it again. On day 15, my son knocked on my bedroom door late one night. I didn't open it. He spoke through the door. He said, "Dad, can we talk? Please. I want to apologize." I said, "There's nothing to talk about." He said, "It was a joke. Brielle and we'd had too much to drink. It got out of hand. I never meant to hurt you." I sat on my bed and I listened to him and I felt nothing. I want you to understand that. I'd been a father for 38 years, and I sat there listening to my only son apologize through a door and I felt nothing. That's what they'd done. They'd burned it all out of me. I said, "Good night." He stood there for a while. Eventually he walked away. Day 20, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Brielle's mother. I didn't know Brielle's mother. I'd never met her in 4 years. She was calling from somewhere in Indiana. She was very polite. She said her daughter had told her some things, and she wanted to smooth things over, and she was sure we could find a solution that worked for everyone. I told her the only solution was the one already in motion, and I hung up. Day 23, my son's friend called. Then his boss, then a woman who said she was a counselor, and Brielle had asked her to mediate. I didn't take any of those calls past hello. I had Mr. Kavanaugh's number on a piece of paper next to my phone. Anyone who called, I told them to call him. He handled the rest. Day 28, my son broke down at dinner. He came into the kitchen while I was eating, and he sat across from me and he started crying. He said he'd been thinking about his mother. He said he knew she'd be ashamed of him. He said he didn't know how it had gotten so bad. He said he'd been sick for a long time, depressed, lost, and Brielle had pulled him in a bad direction, and he'd let her. And he was sorry. He was so sorry. He was begging me to give him another chance. I let him cry. I didn't interrupt. When he was finished, I said, "Your mother loved you very much, so did I. Once. Now I'm finishing my dinner and going to bed. You have 2 days left." He said, "Where am I supposed to go?" I said. "I don't know. I'm not your father anymore. I'm just the man who owns this house." Day 30. I had 2 officers from the sheriff's department come out at 8 in the morning, the way Mr. Kavanaugh had recommended. They were very professional. They stood in the foyer while my son and Brielle carried their things out to her old Hyundai. They had a lot of stuff. It took them 3 trips. Brielle was sobbing the whole time. My son didn't look at me once. He'd packed his clothes into garbage bags because they didn't have suitcases for everything. I sat at the kitchen table and drank my coffee and didn't move. When the last bag was in the car, Brielle came back to the door. She had her hand on the knob. She looked at me and she said, "I hope you die alone." I looked at her and I said, "I'd rather die alone than die surrounded by people like you." She slammed the door so hard a picture fell off the wall in the hallway. I picked it up. It was a picture of me and my wife at the lake in 1986. The glass was cracked. I dusted it off and put it on the mantel. I stood there for a minute just breathing. The house was quiet. It had been so loud for so long, I'd forgotten what quiet sounded like. The next month, I sold the house. I'd already talked to a realtor. It went quick. I got more for it than I expected. I bought a smaller place on the other side of town, a little ranch with a workshop in the garage, walking distance to the senior center. I moved in with what I needed, and I sold or donated the rest. The fancy china. The furniture Brielle had picked out. All of it gone. About 6 weeks after the eviction, I heard from my brother that my son was working at a warehouse in Akron and living in a basement apartment. Brielle had left him after about a month, took most of what they had left and went back to wherever she came from. He was alone. My brother said he looked terrible. He said my son had asked him to ask me if there was any way back. I told my brother, tell him I love him. Tell him I always will. And tell him that's not the same thing as letting him back in. My brother nodded. He said he understood. He said our father would have done the same thing. I want to tell you what I learned from all this because I think it might matter to somebody listening. I spent 3 years telling myself that loving my son meant tolerating whatever he did. I told myself that a good father gives and never stops giving. I was wrong. A good father gives until his child becomes someone the father can be proud of, and if the child becomes someone else, a good father has the courage to step back. Love is an endless tolerance. Love is sometimes the no that saves a person from themselves. I'm 71 now. I live in a small, clean house. I have my routine. Tuesdays and Thursdays at the senior center. Sundays at church, the same one my wife and I went to for 40 years. I've started having coffee with a widow named down the street who lost her husband 2 years ago. We're not anything serious. We just talk. She makes me laugh. I'd forgotten what laughing felt like. My boy hasn't called me in 11 months. I don't know if he ever will. I think about him every single day. I think about the little boy I taught to throw a baseball, and I miss him so much it hurts. But the man who served me dog food, the man who laughed with his girlfriend about my face when I saw what was in the bowl, that man is a stranger to me, and I can't make him my son again just by wanting it. Some nights when it's quiet, I go out to the workshop in my new garage, and I work on whatever project is in front of me. I hum a little. I think about my wife. I think about the long road that brought me here. I'm not bitter. I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just done. I'm done apologizing for taking up space in my own life. I'm done shrinking myself to make my son comfortable. I'm done eating soup at the kitchen counter while strangers laugh in my living room. If you're listening to this and you're in a house that doesn't feel like yours anymore, in a life that's been chipped away from you by someone you love, I want you to know something. You don't have to wait until they hand you a bowl of dog food. You can stand up the day before. You can stand up tomorrow. You can stand up right now. The hardest thing I ever did was stop being a doormat for my own child. The best thing I ever did was the same thing. I keep that picture on my mantle, the one Brielle slammed on the floor. The cracked glass is still there. I never replaced it. Some mornings I look at it and my wife smiles at me from the lake in 1986. And I think she knows. I think wherever she is, she knows. And I think she's proud. That's enough for me. That's more than enough. I've been thinking a lot lately about how a man ends up eating dog food at his own birthday party. It doesn't happen overnight. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides their father is a freeloader in his own paid-off house. It's a slow erosion. It's 1,000 small surrenders that add up to one big one. And looking back now, from the quiet of my new little ranch on the other side of town, I can see every single step that led me there. The truth is, I taught my boy how to treat me. Every time I added another card, every time I let Brielle throw out something of his mother's, every time I ate Campbell's soup at the counter while they ordered steak on my dime, I was teaching him. I was showing him exactly what he could get away with. Love made me a soft target, and I let it. That's the part nobody wants to admit when these things happen. We always want to make ourselves the pure victim. But causes have effects. Choices have weight. And the choice I kept making, year after year, was to disappear a little more so my son could be comfortable. What changed me wasn't the dog food. It was his laugh afterward in the kitchen when he thought I couldn't hear. That laugh told me the truth. I'd been hiding from. He didn't see me as a father anymore. He saw me as a wallet with arms, and no amount of patience, no amount of waiting it out, was ever going to put me back in his eyes as a man worth respecting. He had stopped being able to see me, so I stopped letting him look. If there's anything I'd want a younger man to take from my story, it's this: goodness without strength is just an invitation. You can be the kindest person on this earth, and if you don't have a backbone underneath the kindness, somebody will turn you into furniture they walk on. Real character isn't about how much you can endure. It's about knowing what you're worth and refusing to be priced lower than that. I had to learn that at 70. I'd rather you learn it at 30. I think about my late wife often. I think she'd have been horrified at what our boy became, but I think she'd have been proud of what I finally did, not because I punished him. I didn't. I let him face the natural shape of the life he'd chosen, the one he built without me holding it up. That's not revenge. That's just letting gravity do its work. I sleep well now. I work with my hands. I have my coffee with that widow down the street, and we laugh about nothing in particular. I miss the boy I raised, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I no longer mistake my own quiet dignity for something I can trade away to keep somebody else comfortable. That's the lesson. That's the whole thing. Stand up while you still can. Stand up before they hand you the bowl.